welcome back to this video. My name is Ngane Emmanuel. I'm your tutor for this series, and you are watching an episode of a series called Building Secure, Scalable, Fault Tolerance, and Low Latency APIs with Spring Boot and Java. So, in our previous video, we talked about Spring Boot filters. The one before that, we talked about the general life cycle of a request. So today we are moving on to the next stage in the request security chain, which is Spring Interceptors. This is where Spring is fully loaded, controllers are mapped, and security context exists. And at this level, we are no longer asking who are you, we are asking what are you allowed to do. Now, before we dive right into this, I want to thank everybody that has been following this series thus far, and your contribution, your likes, and your shares have been very motivating. If you're enjoying and you're learning from this series, please give this video a thumbs up. Watch our previous videos to get context and understand previously taught concepts, and comment whatever questions you have. You can reach out to me on my socials, and my links to them are connected in the description below, and the links to the GitHub repository where the GitHub repository for all the content, that's the PDFs and the images, are in the description below. So go check it out, clone it, and start it. That said, like, share, subscribe, and let's continue. So, what are interceptors, right? Now, interceptor, right, it's part of the whole idea of middleware. Well, at least you can look at it like that. And it's a component that sits between your filters and your controller, right? Basically, it sits, it allows you to do, like what its name says, intercept something, in this case a request. So for Spring, interceptors is a component that sits between the filters and the controllers, right? And it allows you to intercept HTTP requests inside the Spring MVC. And of course, I'm talking about Spring because, like I said, this series is proprietary, using the basis of Spring and Java as a tech stack in teaching it. Right? So before your request reach your controller methods, right, they can be intercepted and checked and have further checks being done on them. So unlike filters, right, interceptors understand which controller is being called, which method is it's about to run, which annotations are present for languages that take annotation. And so you can think of interceptors as internal security guard inside your application. So what are the roles of interceptors? The main role of interceptor is policy enforcement. Their job is to apply business level security, right? And common rules will include authentication check, role validation, permissions, verification, tenant isolation, and request auditing and security logging. So you can have subscription tier, validation, and stuff like that. And they decide whether a request deserves to reach your business logic. So one thing you need to understand is that while filters are more of a global, the rules implemented at filter level are more of a global scope. They have a global scope, which means that they affect access to all of your application. Interceptors are more sectional, right? They are rule based on sections. For example, a particular endpoint, right? A couple of or a particular controller that houses all the endpoint for an admin level access. So they are not global in the scope of they protect your entire application, but implementing interceptors is sectional. They will protect sections of your applications, and they allow for a more fine-grained security implementation and policies, right? And what do interceptors protect against? The interceptors protect against local and logical and access-based attacks. Okay, and basically, those attacks that require you to have roles and other things. But you should also understand that interceptors don't protect against low-level attacks like SQL injections and DDoS, right? DDoS. Those ones are handled earlier by the application firewall, the web application application firewall and the filter level, like I said, because those ones are more global. So if you go to our previous video, you're going to see us talk about DDoS and other validations such as SQL injections and stuff. So in that case, in the filters, we protect against the protocol, while in the interceptors now we protect, known threats. So at this level, we know who the user is, we know, we have more information about what method is running, and so we can channel our protection to be more specific to that context. Again, interceptors protect sections of your applications, right? At least that is how they should be implemented. Let me put it that way. Of course, there's nothing stopping you from building an interceptor that has a global protection, but if you have a global security rule that it doesn't require knowledge of the user, you should put it at the filter level. But also, if you have a global security rule that requires knowledge of the user but applies to all your application, it is perfectly fine to put it at the interception. But most of the time, it is advisable to put section-based protection at the interceptor level and much of a global protection at the filter level. Except, of course, that global protection requires knowledge of things like the user role and other information that will not be available at the filter level. Because at this level, the Spring Boot has initialized, the MVC has already been loaded, the methods are loaded, so you can check for the methods, you can check for different things here, and you know the rule. But if you need just like context, even at role base, if you design your system well, I think if you do the JWT key, you can have your rules here. And if you want a more global protection, you can it's still preferable to put here the filters, because at your JWT you're setting the auth context, and the auth context comes with the authenticated user, which will include very important information like the username and the role. So that will be extracted from your claims, and so you can actually write your global validation in the filter. But again, it all depends on how you design your logic. But it's important to note that you can implement even setting global validations at this level too. But for most cases, it is used for protecting sections of your applications, and different sections will require different checks, different validation checks, and so that is what interceptors are mostly used for. So you implement this as your situation will require, right? So let's walk through some examples of things that interceptor protects against. So you have like unauthorized admin checks, privilege escalation, of course is one, we saw this earlier, cross-tenant data access, abuse of premium features, and internal API misuse. So again, those are, so if you ask like cross-tenant, so you have those applications that require, for example, you can have Google, YouTube, Facebook, they all use the same API, right? That API is going, so all of them are all tenants of that particular system, the API system. And so you have the rule that a tenant should only have access to its own information. And so you can do tenant check-in here, tenant restriction here, and you can extract the tenant ID and then use that tenant ID in the tenant context, and then for your queries or your business logic, make use of the tenant's ID to restrict access, right? And those the initial check and the validation and permissions have been set, or configurations have been set at the interceptor level, right? And again, the interceptor is going to intercept the request just before it hits the controller level and perform all these checks. Okay, so let's look at the scope of operations for interceptors, right? Again, I was talking about interceptors do not cover entire applications automatically like filters, right? Instead, they work on configured parts and controllers. For example, the admin part, the staff part, the report part, right? So you're going to have like admin interceptors, staff interceptors, and report interceptors. And we're going to see demonstration of interceptors in our practical session, which will be after this. Oh, actually, maybe in this video. Oh, I don't know. But let's continue. And the security defense that will be implemented at the interceptor level will be role-based access control, where you restrict access based on user role, right? Permission-based access control, again, where it's more a fine-grained rule, right? It's more fine-grained than the rule-based access control, and you give access based on user, like a user write, user read kind of rule, right? Tenant isolation, I already talked about that, right? So basically, in a multi-tenant system, one application serves many organizations, right? And each organization is called a tenant, and interceptors ensure one tenant never access another tenant's data, right? So that definitely will prevent the leaks and other catastrophic hazards. So we have features and subscription control, right? Feature flags and subscription tier, and many systems have paid plans, right? Free, pro, and enterprise. And interceptors can block features based on subscription tiers, right? So this is where you implement that there, right? You also have request auditing and logging, right? Yeah, interceptors can log sensitive actions. Again, examples like password change, data export, admin actions, and all that. This helps in investigation and compliance when issues arise. So let's look at the life cycle of how interceptors work. And the first thing is interceptors have three main phases, right? They have the preHandle, which runs before the controller, and they used to block and validate, used for blocking and validation, and this will be it. The postHandle, which will run after the controller and used for header setting and logging, right? And the afterCompletion, which runs after response, used for cleanup. Most security happens at the preHandle, right? So those are the three phases. So I think that is all about the interceptors. But I think something you should take note. These are some certain ideas you should take note about interceptors. Is that so interceptors are alone, like I was saying initially, and alone they are not enough to protect, right? They must work with filters, service level validation, and method validation, right? And secondly, interceptors run on every request. So heavy database query here will slow your entire system. So you want to keep it as thin as possible, very limited data thing. So like you want to keep it just as close to the implementation of filters as you can to avoid slowing down your application, but also the validation should be robust. Okay, so at this level you can introduce, if you are hitting the database often, then you can use caches to make sure that you, rather than getting to the database or using your database for a single source of truth, we can have caches which are faster. And yeah, so you want to make sure to limit database and other expensive operations here, right? Yeah, I think, is there something? Also, you don't want to put business logic here. You don't want to put business logic. You're not processing of data here. This again is just a validation. And again, you're not doing method level security here. So for those of you, basically, any method level security should be done within the method. I think they should have their own separate implementation. For example, the pre-authorize, I think like those kind of methods. Well, I think we have a custom kind of a method that we created. But again, that will demonstrate again in the tutorials. So let's summarize what we have learned today. Right, interceptors sit between the filters and the controllers. They enforce business level logic. So with business level security, they control access by roles, permissions, and tenants. They prevent unauthorized feature usage. They complement Spring security, and they are critical defense layers, right? So in our security chain, interceptors are the second major gate. They make sure only trusted and authorized requests reach your core logic. So in the next video, we'll move deeper into implementing a demo of interceptors and see what they do. Okay. So that said, see you in the next video. Right?